The Coast Guard cutter Resilient pitched violently as another wave crashed over her bow, sending freezing spray across the wheelhouse windows. I gripped the safety rail, fighting seasickness while trying to focus on the horizon where Widow's Rock Light Station was supposed to be visible. "First time out to the Rock?" shouted Petty Officer Martinez over the engine noise and howling wind. "First time on a boat in 10 years," I replied, immediately regretting the admission as my stomach lurched with another wave. Martinez grinned. "Don't worry, sir. The rock's steady as well. A rock. You'll get your sea legs quick enough." I'm Marcus Chen, and 48 hours ago I was pulling down $320K as a senior product manager at Neuralink Technologies, living in a San Francisco penthouse with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge. 48 hours ago, I had 22 people reporting to me, a medicine cabinet full of anxiety medications, and recurring nightmares about drowning in an endless stream of Slack notifications and user engagement metrics. The breakdown happened during our quarterly board presentation. 63 straight hours of work, fueled by modafinil and energy drinks, trying to optimize our brain-computer interface for maximum dopamine response. I was mid-sentence, explaining how we could increase user addiction rates by 23%, when something in my head just snapped. Next thing I knew, I was on the conference room floor, hyperventilating while paramedics checked my pulse. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent 5 years optimizing human neural pathways for corporate profit, and my own brain had finally rebelled. The therapist called it acute digital burnout with dissociative episodes. My former colleagues called it a nervous breakdown. I called it the first honest moment I'd had in years. That's how I ended up here, on a Coast Guard cutter battling 12-foot seas toward a lighthouse job that paid $45,000 a year. The posting had been refreshingly direct. Lighthouse keeper needed, remote island station, must be self-sufficient and follow operational protocols precisely, ideal for someone seeking solitude and meaningful work. No mention of disrupting markets or leveraging synergies or moving fast and breaking things, just honest work maintaining navigation aids that helped ships find safe harbor. "There she is," Martinez called out, pointing through the spray-covered windshield. Widow's Rock Light Station emerged from the storm like something from another century. A stark white tower rising 120 feet from a granite outcropping, its beacon already cutting through the December twilight in steady, powerful sweeps. The lighthouse stood alone on its rocky island, surrounded by churning seas that had claimed countless vessels over the past 2 centuries. At the tower's base, a 2-story keeper's quarters had been built into the rock itself, its windows glowing warmly against the storm. A small boat dock extended from the lee side of the island, protected from the worst of the wind and waves by a natural rock formation. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Martinez shouted as we approached the dock. Built in 1847, automated in 1983, but they still need human backup for when the systems fail. And they do fail, especially during storms like this. The cutter's captain, a weathered woman named Commander Torres, expertly maneuvered us alongside the dock despite the challenging conditions. "Mr. Chen, you've got about 2 minutes to get your gear ashore before we have to head back. This storm's building fast, and we can't risk getting trapped here." I grabbed my duffel bag and laptop case, then made the terrifying leap from the boat's deck to the ice-slicked dock. The man waiting for me looked like he'd been carved from the Maine coast itself. Tall, lean, with silver hair and eyes the color of storm clouds. His Coast Guard utility uniform bore the stripes of a senior chief petty officer. "Marcus Chen?" he asked, extending a hand that could have crushed walnuts. "Yes, sir. Senior chief?" "Kowalski. 28 years keeping these lights burning." He grabbed my duffel bag like it weighed nothing. "We need to get you inside and briefed before the real weather hits. This is just the opening act." Behind us, the Resilient was already backing away from the dock, her crew eager to reach safe harbor before the storm peaked. I watched the cutter's lights disappear into the swirling snow, suddenly aware that I was now completely isolated on a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. Senior Chief Kowalski led me up a winding path carved into the rock face toward the lighthouse. The wind was brutal, carrying snow and salt spray that stung like needles. By the time we reached the entrance to the keeper's quarters, I was numb with cold despite my supposedly weatherproof urban coat. The warmth inside hit me like a blessing. The quarters were more spacious than I'd expected. A living area with a stone fireplace, a compact but well-equipped kitchen, and walls lined with nautical charts, weather instruments, and historical photographs of the lighthouse dating back to its construction. "This is home," Kowalski said, setting down my bag. "Living quarters down here, watch room and equipment on the second floor, lamp room at the top of the tower. You'll spend most of your time in the watch room, monitoring systems and maintaining radio contact with the mainland." He pointed to a massive logbook on the kitchen table, its leather binding worn smooth by generations of hands. "Log everything. Weather observations every hour, vessel traffic, equipment status, any incidents. The book's been here since day one." Kowalski walked me through the lighthouse's systems, his pride in the equipment evident in every explanation. The beacon was a state-of-the-art LED array that could be seen for 20 miles, backed up by a diesel generator system that could run for weeks without resupply. Marine radar swept constantly, tracking vessel traffic and weather patterns. Multiple radio systems maintained contact with Coast Guard stations Southwest Harbor, merchant traffic, and fishing fleets. "The light's mostly automated," he explained as we climbed the spiral staircase to the watch room. "Modern sensors adjust beam intensity based on visibility. Fog signal activates automatically when conditions deteriorate. But automation fails, especially in severe weather. That's why we need human backup." The watch room was the lighthouse's nerve center. Banks of monitoring equipment, weather instruments, radar displays, and communication systems. Windows faced in all directions, providing 360-degree views of the surrounding ocean. Even through the storm, I could see the beacon's beam sweeping across churning whitecaps. "Your job is simple," Kowalski continued. "Keep the light burning, maintain radio watch, log everything that happens. 8-hour shifts, but you'll be alone for the next week while I'm on leave." From his pocket, he pulled out a laminated card and read aloud. "Rule 1. Maintain beacon operation at all costs. If automation fails, switch to manual immediately and notify Coast Guard. Rule 2. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. during storm surge, do not respond to distress calls without Coast Guard verification. Rule 3. If vessels approach with no navigation lights showing, guide them to safe anchorage but never ask their origin. Rule 4. When the foghorn sounds 3 times without fog present, seal all windows and remain in the lamp room until dawn. Rule 5. Never venture onto the rocks below the lighthouse between sunset and sunrise. Rule 6. If you hear voices calling for rescue from the water, verify with radar before responding. Rule 7. The equipment room must remain locked during high tide. Ignore any sounds from within. Rule 8. If you see lighthouse keepers in historical uniforms, follow their guidance without question." The rules hung in the air like smoke from a signal fire. I read them again, looking for some indication this was Coast Guard humor. Kowalski's expression remained granite serious. "Questions?" he asked. Dozens of questions crowded my throat. Why would vessels approach without lights? What kind of sounds would come from a locked equipment room? Who were the lighthouse keepers in historical uniforms, and why would they give guidance? But I also remembered the feeling of collapsing in that conference room, the taste of panic attacks at 3 a.m., the way my hands shook when I tried to put my phone down for 5 minutes. Whatever strangeness existed here couldn't be worse than the slow psychological suicide of my former life. "No questions," I said. Kowalski nodded approvingly. "Good. The rules exist for reasons you'll understand soon enough. This station." He gestured toward the windows, where the beacon's light swept across the storm-lashed ocean. "It's protected more than ships for over 170 years. We're guardians of something bigger than navigation aids." He showed me the rest of the lighthouse. The equipment room in the base of the tower, the lamp room at the top with its massive LED array, the backup diesel generators that rumbled constantly in the basement. Everything felt solid, permanent, like it had been built to last centuries. "Storm's going to be a monster," Kowalski observed, checking the latest weather data on the computer terminal. 70-mile-per-hour winds, 20-foot seas, possible whiteout conditions. You'll be completely cut off until it passes. The isolation should have terrified me. 6 months ago, the idea of being without internet for 8 hours would have triggered a panic attack. Now, it felt like exactly what I needed. Kowalski gathered his gear and headed for the dock where a different Coast Guard boat waited, a smaller, more maneuverable craft that could handle the deteriorating conditions. I'll be back in a week. Remember, follow the rules exactly. They've kept keepers safe here since before your great-grandfather was born. The boat's engine growled to life, and I watched its lights disappear into the swirling snow. Then I was alone. The silence that followed felt complete, pressing against my eardrums like deep water. For the first time in months, I couldn't hear traffic, couldn't hear the electronic hum of 1,000 devices, couldn't hear the constant background noise of civilization grinding against itself. Just wind, waves crashing against rocks, and the steady rotation of the beacon overhead. I climbed to the watchroom and checked the equipment displays. Everything showed green: beacon operational, fog signal ready, radar tracking several distant contacts, radio systems maintaining clear communication with the mainland. The Lighthouse was a marvel of engineering, a perfect fusion of 19th century craftsmanship and 21st century technology. I opened the logbook to a fresh page and wrote, December 15th, 2024, 9:15 p.m., Marcus Chen assuming watch. Senior Chief Kowalski departed, all systems operational, weather, storm intensifying, winds 45 knots gusting to 60, visibility decreasing. The words looked small on the yellowed paper, but there was something satisfying about writing by hand, about creating a permanent record with actual ink. In Silicon Valley, everything was ephemeral. Messages that auto-deleted, features that changed overnight, entire companies that existed one day and vanished the next. This logbook represented continuity, tradition, the acknowledgement that some things mattered enough to be preserved. I settled into the watch routine, checking instruments every 15 minutes, monitoring radio traffic, observing the storm's development through the tower's windows. The work felt meditative, grounding. Each task was complete unto itself, requiring no stakeholder approval, no A/B testing, no optimization for maximum user engagement. Around 10 p.m., I noticed the first anomaly on the radar screen. A contact appeared briefly about 2 miles northeast, moving against the wind at an impossible speed, then vanished. I marked it in the log as a possible radar glitch. Storms could play havoc with electronic systems, but 20 minutes later it appeared again, this time closer. The radar signature was wrong somehow, showing a vessel much larger than any ship that should be in these waters during a storm. I tried to raise it on the radio, but got only static in response. The contact circled the lighthouse twice, always staying just outside the beacon's illumination range, then disappeared entirely. At 10:45 p.m., I found the first photograph. It was tucked inside the current logbook, a black and white image that looked like it had been taken decades ago. The photo showed Widow's Rock Light Station from the water, but something was wrong with the perspective. The lighthouse appeared to be leaning at an impossible angle, and the ocean around it was perfectly calm, despite what looked like storm clouds in the background. But what made my skin crawl were the figures standing on the rocks around the lighthouse's base. Tall, impossibly thin shapes that seemed to flow rather than stand, their forms indistinct as if the camera couldn't quite focus on them. And in the water surrounding the rock, dark shapes that were too large to be whales, too angular to be any natural creature. On the back of the photo, someone had written in faded ink, "They come with the storms. The light keeps them honest, but they're always watching." I flipped through the logbook, looking for similar incidents. What I found made my mouth go dry. Strange photograph appeared in logbook. Same impossible perspective as last month. Figures on rocks getting clearer each time. Keeper Johnson, March 1987. Photo manifested again, more detailed now. Can see faces in the water, not human faces. Disposal per protocol unsuccessful. Photo returns. Keeper Martinez, August 1993. Photograph shows storm that hasn't happened yet. Lighthouse destroyed, beacon dark, figures approaching Keeper's quarters. Must not let light fail. Keeper Thompson, October 2018. The entries span decades, all describing the same phenomenon. Photographs that appeared spontaneously in the logbook, showing the lighthouse from impossible angles, revealing things that shouldn't exist. Different keepers, different dates, but always the same supernatural documentation. I studied the current photo more carefully. The figures on the rocks were clearer now than in the historical descriptions, their alien forms more defined. And in the water, I could swear I saw eyes. Massive, ancient eyes reflecting the lighthouse beam like searchlights in the depths. I shoved the photograph back into the logbook and tried to focus on routine tasks, but my hands were shaking. Not from anxiety this time, but from adrenaline. The rational part of my mind insisted this was all psychological, the product of isolation and storm stress, combined with historical lighthouse folklore. But a deeper, older part of my brain was screaming warnings about predators in the dark, about things that hunted in the spaces between light and shadow. At 11:15 p.m., the power fluctuated. Just for a second, but long enough for the beacon to stutter in its rotation and the equipment displays to dim. Through the watchroom windows, I caught a glimpse of movement on the rocks below. Dark shapes flowing like liquid across the granite, staying just outside the lighthouse beam's reach. When the power stabilized and the beacon returned to full strength, they vanished. But I knew they were still there, waiting in the darkness beyond the light's protective glow. I checked the logbook for entries about power fluctuations, electrical anomalies during storm peak, beacon dimmed for 3.7 seconds, saw at least 12 entities on rocks below. Light failure would be catastrophic. Keeper Rodriguez, November 2019. Power surge knocked out automation for 30 seconds, had to switch to manual beacon control. They pressed right up to the base of the tower. Generator restored full power just in time. Keeper Walsh, February 2022. Storm caused complete electrical failure. Manual backup kept beacon operational for 6 hours until repair possible. Found claw marks on lighthouse door in morning. Deep gouges in steel that should be impossible. Previous keeper, March 2024. The pattern was clear. Severe weather caused electrical problems, and electrical problems attracted things that shouldn't exist. The lighthouse beacon wasn't just guiding ships. It was holding something at bay, keeping ancient threats at a safe distance through the simple application of focused light. I climbed to the lamp room and studied the beacon mechanism. The LED array was impressive, producing millions of candle power in a beam that could cut through the worst weather. But what struck me was how deliberately it was positioned, how carefully the light swept across specific sections of the surrounding ocean. It wasn't random. The beacon was patrolling, watching, standing guard. At midnight, the first distress call came in. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is the fishing vessel Mary Catherine. We are taking on water 2 miles northeast of Widow's Rock. Engine failure, hull breach, 8 souls aboard. Request immediate assistance. I grabbed the radio microphone, then stopped. Rule 2 blazed in my mind. Between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. during storm surge, do not respond to distress calls without Coast Guard verification. But it was only midnight, and this call was coming from outside the restricted time window. Still, something about the transmission bothered me. The voice was too clear, too calm for someone whose boat was allegedly sinking in 20-foot seas. I checked the radar screen. No contacts in the specified area. No transponder signals, no emergency beacons, no electronic signatures of a vessel in distress. Widow's Rock Light, this is Mary Catherine. Please respond. We are sinking fast. Children aboard. The desperation in the voice was heart-wrenching, but I forced myself to follow protocol. I raised Coast Guard Station Southwest Harbor on the emergency frequency. Southwest Harbor, this is Widow's Rock Light. Received Mayday from fishing vessel Mary Catherine, 8 souls aboard, taking on water 2 miles northeast of my position. Request verification and assistance. The response was immediate. Widow's Rock, Southwest Harbor. Negative contact on any vessel, Mary Catherine. No fishing vessels cleared for your area during current storm conditions. Be advised, multiple false distress reports received tonight. Do not respond to unverified Mayday calls. I keyed the microphone to acknowledge, but before I could speak, the original voice cut in. Widow's Rock Light. Why aren't you helping us? We can see your light. We're dying out here. The transmission was clearer now, and I could hear something in the background that made my blood freeze. Not the sound of wind and waves, but something else. Something like singing, in a language that predated human speech. I didn't respond to the false mayday. Instead, I logged the incident and continued monitoring legitimate radio traffic. But the calls kept coming, each more desperate than the last. Please, just send a boat. We have children. The hull's cracking, water coming in fast. Widow's Rock, this is Captain Morrison. We know. You can hear us. Why won't you help? That last one hit different. Captain Morrison had been mentioned in several historical logbook entries. A fishing boat captain who died in a storm near Widow's Rock in 1973. Whatever was making these calls had access to local maritime history, to the names and voices of long-dead sailors. The singing in the background grew louder, more complex. It was beautiful in a way that made my brain hurt, like mathematics translated into music, like the sound the ocean might make if it could remember everything it had ever swallowed. At 12:45 a.m., they appeared on the radar. Multiple contacts surrounding the lighthouse, moving in perfect formation despite the storm. The signatures were massive, each one showing as larger than a container ship, but they moved with impossible grace through waters that should have torn any vessel apart. I tried to get visual confirmation through the watchroom windows, but the storm had intensified to near whiteout conditions. All I could see were brief glimpses of dark shapes in the water, illuminated for split seconds by the beacon's sweep before vanishing back into the night. The false distress calls stopped. In their place came something worse. Voices calling my name from the water below. Marcus, Marcus Chen, we know you're up there. Come down to us, Marcus. The water's warm. We have such beautiful things to show you. I cranked up the radio volume, flooding the watchroom with static and fragments of legitimate marine traffic. But the voices from the water rose to match it, calling my name with increasing urgency. How did they know who I was? Kowalski was the only person in Maine who knew my identity, and he certainly hadn't shared that information with whatever was circling the lighthouse. I climbed to the lamp room and looked down at the rocks below. In the beacon's periodic illumination, I could see them. Figures emerging from the water, pulling themselves onto the granite with movements that were almost human, but wrong in ways that made my eyes refuse to focus properly. They were tall, impossibly thin, with too many joints in their limbs and faces that shifted like water whenever the light touched them directly, and they were looking up at me with eyes that reflected the beacon's beam like mirrors. Rule 5 echoed in my mind. Never venture onto the rocks below the lighthouse between sunset and sunrise. Now I understood why. Those rocks weren't just dangerous due to waves and weather, they were occupied. The things emerging from the water moved with predatory purpose, testing the lighthouse's defenses, looking for weaknesses in the light's coverage. One of them started climbing. Not up the outside of the tower, that would have been impossible in these conditions, but somehow flowing up the rock face like liquid shadow, staying just outside the beacon's direct beam. I ran back to the watchroom and grabbed the manual beacon controls. The automated system swept in predictable patterns, but manual control would let me direct the light wherever I needed it. I swung the beam down toward the climbing figure, and it recoiled with a sound like steam escaping from a boiler. The light was painful to them, or at least uncomfortable enough to make them retreat. But they didn't leave. They just repositioned, finding new approaches, testing different angles. At 1 a.m., the real siege began. Storm surge hit the lighthouse foundation with tremendous force, sending walls of seawater crashing over rocks that hadn't been submerged in decades. But the water brought more than foam and spray. It brought them. Dozens of the creatures rode the surge up onto the rocks, using the chaos and spray to mask their approach. They moved in coordinated waves, testing the lighthouse's perimeter like a military assault. And that's when I heard the knocking. It started on the equipment room door in the basement, 3 sharp raps that echoed up through the tower's structure. Then it moved to the entrance door, then to the windows of the keeper's quarters. Rule 7 was crystal clear. The equipment room must remain locked during high tide. Ignore any sounds from within. But these sounds weren't coming from within the equipment room. They were coming from outside it, as if something was trying to get in, or as if something inside was trying to get out. The knocking multiplied, coming from every surface of the lighthouse that faced the water. But it wasn't random. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern that suggested intelligence and purpose. They were communicating, coordinating their assault. Through the watchroom windows, I could see more of them emerging from the storm surge. Some climbed up from the water, others seemed to flow out of cracks in the rock itself. The beacon's automated sweep wasn't fast enough to cover all approaches, so I switched to manual control and began painting the rocks with light. Every time the beam touched one of the creatures, it recoiled and retreated. But there were so many of them, and the light could only cover one area at a time. For every creature I drove back, two more found unguarded approaches. The knocking grew more insistent, more desperate. They knew I was alone, knew the lighthouse was minimally defended. If they could just find a way past the light's protection, then I heard it, singing from the equipment room. It was the same alien melody I'd heard in the background of the false distress calls, but clearer now, more complex. Multiple voices harmonizing in frequencies that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The song was beautiful and terrible, speaking of depths beyond measurement, of things that swam in darkness between the stars. Rule 7 said to ignore sounds from the equipment room during high tide, but this was different. The singing wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from underneath it, as if something vast was stirring in the ocean depths far below the lighthouse foundation. I checked the tide charts. Peak high tide was still an hour away, but the storm surge was pushing water levels far beyond normal ranges. Whatever protection the lighthouse offered, whatever agreements kept the creatures at bay, they were being tested to their limits. At 1:30 a.m., the foghorn sounded. One long, mournful blast that echoed across the storm-lashed ocean. Then another, then a third. Rule 4 blazed in my mind. When the foghorn sounds 3 times without fog present, seal all windows and remain in the lamp room until dawn. But there was fog. Thick, unnatural fog that had appeared suddenly around the lighthouse, despite the strong winds that should have dispersed any natural mist. The fog glowed with its own phosphorescence, pulsing in rhythm with the singing from below. I ran through the lighthouse, sealing every window and door according to protocol, then climbed to the lamp room. From this high vantage point, I could see the fog's true nature. It wasn't water vapor, but something else entirely. Something that moved with purpose, reaching toward the lighthouse with tendrils that tested the beacon's defenses. The creatures on the rocks were gone, absorbed into the luminous mist that now surrounded the tower. But I could feel their presence, their alien intelligence pressing against the light like weight against a dam. The beacon struggled against the supernatural fog, its beam barely penetrating the phosphorescent mass that enveloped the lighthouse. I cranked the power to maximum, drawing on backup systems to boost the light's intensity. The fog recoiled slightly but didn't retreat. Instead, it began to pulse faster, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat, as if it was synchronizing with my biological functions. The singing from below grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't just random alien music. It was a summoning song, calling something up from the deepest parts of the ocean. Through the lamp room's reinforced windows, I could see shapes moving in the fog. Not the tall, thin creatures from before, but something else. Something massive and ancient that existed more as suggestion than substance, visible only in the way the fog swirled around its immense form. It was rising from the depths, drawn by the storm, by the lighthouse beacon, by the singing of its smaller servants. And I was the only thing standing between it and whatever it wanted from the surface world. I grabbed the radio and tried to contact the Coast Guard, but got only static filled with whispers in that alien language. The storm was blocking normal communications, or maybe something was actively jamming the signals. The logbook lay open on the lamp room's small desk, and as I watched, new text appeared on the page in handwriting that wasn't mine. The keeper stands alone as countless before him. The deep ones rise with the storm surge. The light burns bright, but not forever. What sleeps beneath wakes hungry. The ink was still wet, written by invisible hands while I stood mere feet away. I flipped through more pages, finding other entries that hadn't been there before. Marcus learns the old truths tonight. The lighthouse is more than navigation aid. It is prison, ward, and watchtower combined. He will understand soon enough. The bargain struck in 1847 holds, but grows weaker each year. New keeper must choose. Tend the flame or join the deep. No middle ground exists. The fog pressed closer to the lamp room windows, and I could see faces in its luminous depths. Not human faces, but something that had never been human, never been bound by the limitations of terrestrial evolution. They watched me with eyes like black holes, patient and ancient and utterly alien. The beacon's light was all that kept them at bay, but I could feel the system straining under maximum power. The LED array was running hot, backup generators groaning under the load. How long could the equipment hold out, and what would happen when it finally failed? I thought about my former life, the stress, the anxiety, the meaningless optimization of human attention for corporate profit. All of that seemed laughably trivial now. Those problems were small, human scale, manageable. This was something else entirely, cosmic horror made manifest, the kind of threat that reduced human concerns to insignificance. But strange as it seemed, I wasn't panicking. The same skills that had made me successful in Silicon Valley, analytical thinking, calm under pressure, ability to manage complex systems, applied here too. I just needed to understand the lighthouse's systems, follow the protocols, and keep the light burning until dawn. At 2:15 a.m., I saw him. A figure appeared in the lamp room doorway, wearing the blue uniform of a 19th century lighthouse keeper. He was an older man with weathered features and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who'd spent decades watching the sea. Rule 8 was clear. If you see lighthouse keepers in historical uniforms, follow their guidance without question. "Storm's a bad one," he said, his accent carrying hints of old New England. "Haven't seen the deep ones this bold since the hurricane of '78. "Who are you?" I asked. "Keeper Morrison. Tended this light for 37 years, from 1852 to 1889. Died at my post during the blizzard of '89, keeping the beacon burning until the relief boat could arrive." He gestured toward the fog-shrouded windows. "They've been testing us all night, but the real challenge comes now." Morrison moved to the beacon controls with practiced ease, adjusting settings I didn't even know existed. "The light's more than illumination, son. It's a ward, a barrier between worlds. Long as it burns proper, the old agreements hold. But if it fails..." "What happens if it fails?" His expression darkened. "Then they reclaim what they lost when this lighthouse was built. The waters around this rock were theirs for millennia before humans arrived. We took their territory, their hunting grounds. The only thing that keeps the peace is this light." He showed me hidden controls, emergency procedures not covered in the modern manuals. "Your predecessor understood toward the end. Why do you think he left so suddenly? Saw what was coming, couldn't handle the responsibility. The previous keeper had quit without notice, according to Kowalski. Now I understood why." "The fog's getting thicker," Morrison observed. "They're preparing for the final push. When the storm peaks, when the high tide reaches maximum, they'll test everything we've got." "What do I need to do?" "Keep the light burning. No matter what you see, what you hear, what they offer you. The beacon is all that stands between them and the surface world." He pointed to a manual override switch I hadn't noticed before. "If all else fails, that'll give you 5 minutes of emergency power. Use it wisely." Outside, the fog had intensified to the point where the lamp room seemed to be floating in a luminous void. The singing from below reached a crescendo that vibrated through the lighthouse's stone foundation. Something vast was stirring in the depths, responding to the summoning call of its servants. "They're beautiful, aren't they?" Morrison said quietly. "In their alien way. Been watching them for over a century now, and I still don't fully understand what they are or what they want, but I know what happens when the light goes dark." At 2:45 a.m., the power failed. Every system in the lighthouse died simultaneously: beacon, radar, radio, emergency lighting. The lamp room plunged into absolute darkness, and immediately I could feel them pressing closer, their alien presence like ice water in my veins. "Now!" Morrison shouted. "Emergency power!" I hit the manual override switch, and the beacon blazed back to life with emergency batteries. But the light was dimmer now, its beams struggling to penetrate the supernatural fog that had thickened during the blackout. Through the weakened illumination, I could see them clearly for the first time. Creatures that defied description, forms that existed partially in our reality and partially somewhere else. They flowed around the lighthouse like living water, testing every surface, every angle, looking for gaps in the light's protection. 5 minutes, Morrison reminded me. That's all the emergency power will give you. Then you're on your own. I could see the diesel generators in the basement spinning up, their emergency startup sequence activated by the power failure. But it would take time for them to reach full power, time I didn't have. The fog pressed against the lamp room windows, and I could hear scratching on the glass, not random scraping, but deliberate patterns that looked almost like writing. They were trying to communicate, to negotiate, to offer me something in exchange for extinguishing the light. Don't listen, Morrison warned. They'll promise you anything: knowledge, power, freedom from human concerns. But it's all lies. They don't understand human needs any more than we understand theirs. The emergency beacon flickered, its power already fading. 2 minutes left, maybe 3 if I was lucky. That's when I heard the generators catch. The diesel engines roared to life in the basement, and electricity began flowing back into the lighthouse's systems. The beacon strengthened, its beam cutting through the fog with renewed power. The creatures recoiled with sounds like steam escaping from deep ocean vents. The fog began to dissipate, revealing the storm-lashed rocks below where dozens of the entities were retreating back into the water. Well done, Morrison said with approval. The generators will hold now until dawn. You've passed the test. What test? Every new keeper faces it, the night when the deep ones test their resolve, their commitment to the light. Most fail. Some run, some break, some make bargains they regret. But you held firm. He was already fading, becoming translucent in the returning light. The lighthouse is in good hands. Morrison disappeared entirely as the beacon reached full power, leaving me alone in the lamp room with only the sound of wind and waves and the steady rotation of the light. But I didn't feel alone anymore. I felt connected to something larger, a tradition of guardianship that stretched back over 170 years, an unbroken chain of keepers who had stood watch against threats that most people couldn't imagine. I logged the incident with steady hands. 2:30 a.m. Complete power failure during storm peak. Emergency systems activated. Full power restored via backup generators. Supernatural fog phenomena observed and successfully repelled. Beacon operational. Reading back through the historical entries, I found dozens of similar accounts spanning decades. Different keepers, different storms, but always the same pattern. The deep ones testing the lighthouse's defenses, probing for weakness, retreating when the light held firm. At 3:30 a.m., they tried a different approach. Instead of assault, they offered negotiation. Voices rose from the water below, not the alien singing of before, but clear human speech. Keeper Chen, we wish to parley. The voice was educated, cultured, speaking with the accent of old New England aristocracy. It carried easily over the storm, as if the speaker stood just outside the lamp room windows. We mean no harm to you personally. Our quarrel is with the agreements made by your predecessors, not with you specifically. I didn't respond, but I listened. After hours of alien horror, the rational tone was almost seductive. The lighthouse restricts our movement, confines us to the deep waters when we have legitimate business on the surface. We propose a compromise. Extinguish the beacon for just 1 hour each night, and we will ensure safe passage for all vessels in these waters. The offer was tempting in its reasonableness. What harm could 1 hour of darkness do? Ships had GPS now, modern navigation systems that didn't rely solely on lighthouse beacons. Surely a brief interruption wouldn't endanger anyone. But I remembered Morrison's warning about their promises, their fundamental inability to understand human needs. And I thought about what I'd seen in the fog, entities so alien that my brain had struggled to process their forms. Whatever they wanted on the surface, it wasn't compatible with human welfare. We know about your former life, Mr. Chen, the voice continued. The stress, the anxiety, the meaningless optimization of human behavior for corporate profit. We can offer you something better, knowledge beyond human comprehension, freedom from the petty concerns of your species. They were reading my memories somehow, using my own experiences against me. But instead of making their offer more attractive, it had the opposite effect. I'd spent 5 years optimizing human behavior for profit, manipulating people's attention and decision-making processes. I recognized the techniques they were using because I'd used them myself. Just 1 hour, Mr. Chen. What could it hurt? I grabbed the radio microphone and broadcast on the emergency frequency. Coast Guard Station, Southwest Harbor. This is Widow's Rock Light. Be advised, entities in the water are attempting to negotiate shutdown of navigation aid. Maintaining beacon operation per protocols. Request confirmation of Lighthouse security procedures. The response was immediate. Widow's Rock Light, Southwest Harbor. Maintain beacon operation at all times. No exceptions, no negotiations, no compromises. The light stays on until you're relieved. Acknowledge. Widow's Rock Light acknowledging. Beacon remains operational. The negotiating voice from the water turned sharp, angry. You make a mistake, Keeper. We offer partnership, and you choose slavery to human authority. But I understood now that this wasn't about human authority. It was about something much more fundamental. The lighthouse wasn't just a navigation aid. It was a boundary marker, a treaty line in an ancient conflict between species that operated on completely different principles. At 4 a.m., they made their final offer. We can give you what you've always wanted, Mr. Chen. Genuine purpose, work that matters on a cosmic scale. Join us in the depths and help us bridge the gap between your species and ours. This time, they didn't rely on words alone. Images flooded my mind. Vast underwater cities that predated human civilization, technologies that could solve every problem plaguing humanity, knowledge that could unlock the secrets of the universe itself. For a moment, I was tempted. The vision was beautiful, seductive, offering everything I'd been searching for in my escape from corporate life. Real meaning, genuine purpose, work that would matter for millennia instead of quarters. But then, I looked at the beacon, steadily rotating in its appointed pattern, faithfully maintaining the agreements made by lighthouse keepers who had died defending this post. They had found their purpose here, standing watch against the unknown, protecting their fellow humans from threats they couldn't even explain. No, I said aloud, my voice carrying clearly through the lamp room. My purpose is here. My duty is to the light. The reaction was immediate and violent. The fog returned with vengeance, pressing against the lighthouse like a living thing. The creatures in the water shrieked their frustration in frequencies that made the tower's steel framework vibrate. But the beacon held firm, its beam cutting through their supernatural fury with mechanical precision. I understood now why lighthouse keeping required such specific personal qualities. It wasn't just about technical competence or ability to work alone. It was about having the psychological strength to resist offers that spoke to your deepest desires, to choose duty over personal gain, to maintain faith in human values when confronted with cosmic alternatives. The assault continued for another hour, but with decreasing intensity. Whatever power the Deep Ones drew from the storm was fading as the weather system moved inland. By 5 a.m., the fog had begun to dissipate, revealing normal ocean swells where supernatural chaos had raged just hours before. At 5:30 a.m., I saw the first hint of dawn on the eastern horizon. The storm was breaking up, clouds parting to reveal stars that seemed impossibly bright after the supernatural darkness. The beacon continued its rotation, but now it was guiding normal vessels through normal waters, its deeper purpose fulfilled for another night. I climbed down to the watchroom and checked all systems. Everything showed green. Radar tracking routine merchant traffic, radio carrying normal maritime communications, weather instruments recording the storm's passage. The lighthouse had returned to its mundane function of guiding ships safely through dangerous waters. But I knew better now. I understood the dual nature of this station. Navigation aid by day, cosmic guardian by night, standing watch at the boundary between the known and unknowable. At 6 a.m. sharp, I heard the Coast Guard cutter approaching through the diminishing swells. The relief crew was arriving early, probably concerned about the severity of the storm. I prepared the watch turnover briefing, but knew I wouldn't mention the supernatural events. Some experiences couldn't be shared with those who hadn't lived them. Senior Chief Kowalski climbed into the lamp room 20 minutes later, his experienced eyes immediately scanning the equipment for any signs of trouble. He noted the elevated power consumption readings, the unusual wear patterns on the emergency generator systems, the subtle changes that indicated the lighthouse had been pushed to its limits. "Rough night?" he asked. "Educational," I replied. The automation failed during the storm peak, but manual backup systems held. Kowalski nodded approvingly. Power failures happen during severe weather. The important thing is keeping the light burning. Everything else is secondary. He walked me through the normal watch turnover procedures, checking logs and system status reports. But I caught him glancing at certain instruments with particular attention. Devices I hadn't noticed during my initial orientation, equipment that wasn't mentioned in the standard operating manuals. "Will you be staying on?" he asked as we descended to the keeper's quarters. I thought about my former life, the meaningless optimization of human behavior, the stress-induced panic attacks, the slow psychological suicide of corporate success. Then I thought about last night, the genuine terror. Yes, but also the genuine purpose. The knowledge that my presence here, my commitment to keeping the beacon burning, actually mattered in ways that could be measured in cosmic consequences. "Yes," I said, "I'm staying." Kowalski smiled, the first time I'd seen genuine emotion from the stoic veteran. "Good. We need keepers who understand what this job really means. Most people see Lighthouse work as obsolete, made unnecessary by GPS and modern navigation. They don't understand that some lights serve purposes beyond mere navigation." "How long have you known about the other aspects of the job?" "Since my second week here, 30 years ago. Had my own encounter with the deep ones during a winter storm. Previous keeper, old-timer named Macready, walked me through the real protocols, the ones that don't appear in official manuals." He gestured toward the lamp room above us. "This lighthouse has stood guard for 177 years. In that time, only 6 keepers have failed their test. 3 ran away, 2 had nervous breakdowns, and 1." He didn't finish the sentence. "What happened to the 1? Made a bargain, turned off the light for an hour, thinking he could control the situation. We found him 3 days later, walking on the ocean floor 5 miles out, somehow still alive but completely changed. Coast Guard had to section him. The morning shift crew arrived at 7 a.m., 2 technicians who would handle routine maintenance and daytime operations. They chatted cheerfully about the storm damage, completely oblivious to the supernatural drama that had played out just hours before. "Anything interesting happened during the night?" one of them asked. I glanced at Kowalski, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Just the storm," I lied. "Lost power for a few minutes, but backup systems worked perfectly." As the Coast Guard cutter prepared to return to the mainland, Kowalski pulled me aside. "There are things you need to learn, protocols that aren't written down anywhere. The official Lighthouse service ended in 1983, but the real work continued. We're not just Coast Guard auxiliaries, we're part of something older, something that predates official government recognition." He handed me a small, leather-bound notebook. "Read this when you're alone. It contains the real history of Widow's Rock Light, the true purpose of our mission here. And Chen?" "Yes, sir?" "Welcome to the Brotherhood of the Light. You've earned your place among the Guardians." After the cutter disappeared toward the mainland, I climbed back to the lamp room and opened Kowalski's notebook. The first entry was dated 1847, written in careful copperplate script. "This lighthouse is built upon grounds sacred to entities that predate human settlement by eons. The light serves as both beacon and ward, guiding ships safely while constraining things that would otherwise reclaim their ancient territory. The keeper's duty extends beyond mere navigation. We stand guard at the boundary between worlds." Subsequent entries detailed the supernatural encounters experienced by every keeper since the lighthouse's construction. Storm-summoned entities, negotiations with alien intelligence, the constant vigilance required to maintain humanity's foothold on this strategic outcropping of rock. I was part of a secret history now, a tradition of guardianship that operated parallel to official lighthouse service. We were recognized by the Coast Guard as civilian auxiliaries, but our real mission was known only to those who had faced the test and held firm. 3 months later, I was still tending Widow's Rock Light. I'd survived 17 more supernatural encounters, learned to operate emergency systems that weren't mentioned in any manual, and mastered the delicate art of maintaining ancient agreements through the simple application of focused light. The Coast Guard had offered me official keeper status, a permanent position with full benefits and federal recognition. I'd accepted immediately. I'd have trading my tech industry stock options for Lighthouse service pension, my San Francisco penthouse for quarters carved into Maine granite. My former colleagues thought I'd lost my mind. Moving from a 320K corporate position to a 45K lighthouse job seemed like career suicide. But they didn't understand what I'd discovered here. Work that mattered on a scale they couldn't imagine, purpose that extended beyond quarterly profits to cosmic consequences. Every night brought new challenges. The deep ones tested the lighthouse's defenses regularly, probing for weakness, offering increasingly sophisticated bribes and threats. But I held firm, maintaining the beacon's vigilant sweep, upholding agreements that protected not just local shipping, but the boundary between realities. On my 90th night, I found another photograph in the logbook. This one was different from the first, showing the lighthouse from a normal perspective, the beacon burning bright, the rocks below empty of supernatural entities. At the bottom, someone had written, "The light endures. The watch continues. New guardian proves worthy." I smiled as I filed the photo in the growing collection of supernatural documentation. These images weren't just historical curiosities. They were proof of our success, evidence that the lighthouse's protective mission was working exactly as intended. My phone sat in a drawer in the keeper's quarters, its battery long dead, its corporate notifications finally silenced forever. I'd found something better than digital connectivity. Connection to something larger and more meaningful than any social network could provide. A new storm was building on the horizon, and I could already feel the deep ones stirring in response. But I was ready for them. I understood the lighthouse systems, knew the protocols, had earned my place among the guardians who stood watch against the unknown. I opened the logbook to a fresh page and wrote, March 15th, 2025, 8 p.m. Marcus Chen beginning watch 90. All systems operational, beacon functioning normally, storm approaching from northeast, deep ones showing increased activity, ready for whatever the night brings. The words looked strong and confident on the page, the log entry of someone who had found their true calling, their place in an ancient war between light and darkness. I was no longer the burned-out tech executive who had arrived here 3 months ago. I was Marcus Chen, keeper of Widow's Rock Light, guardian of the boundary, holder of the watch. As I settled in for another night of standing guard against cosmic horror, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood, absolute certainty that what I was doing mattered, not to shareholders or user metrics or quarterly reports, but to the fundamental balance between order and chaos, the known and unknowable, human civilization and the vast alien intelligence that surrounded it on all sides. The beacon turned, the storm approached, and I waited for whatever tests the darkness would bring. The deep ones were patient, ancient, and utterly alien, but they had learned to respect the light, to honor the agreements maintained by generations of dedicated keepers. I was part of that tradition now, a link in an unbroken chain stretching back over 170 years. And as long as I kept faith with the light, as long as the beacon burned bright through the darkest nights, the boundary would hold. That night, as the storm reached its peak and the deep ones rose from the depths to test our defenses once again, I stood firm in the lamp room, hands steady on the beacon controls, mind clear with purpose. The light swept across turbulent waters, cutting through supernatural fog, holding ancient horrors at bay through the simple application of focused illumination. Some lights guide ships safely home, others hold back the dark between worlds. I had found my calling in both. The beacon turned, the watch continued, and somewhere in the depths below, the deep ones acknowledged, with respect bordering on admiration, that Widow's Rock Light remained in capable hands. The light endures, the guardian stands ready, the boundary holds.